Welcome to the Family Builders Podcast. No matter what our family dynamic is, we can all use some help from time to time. Our hope and prayer is that this podcast is a help and a blessing to you each and every week. And now our host, Pastor David Moore, and co-host, Pastor A.J. Harold.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Family Builders Podcast. It's great to be back with you. This is your host, Pastor David Moore from Lakeview Baptist Church in Newcastle, Oklahoma, and joined by my capable co-host from his Crystal Studios high above the Hollywood Hills. Welcome, Pastor A.J. Harold. How are you, sir?
Hey, Pastor Moore. So excited to be here. Looking forward to the episode today.
Amen. Yeah, it's excited to do something we've not attempted before. And this will be fun. We'll get to that in just a second. I just want to remind our listeners first, if you have any suggestions for topics for the podcast, or if you have any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to email us, familybuilderspodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to the Facebook group and join and follow and like and comment and share and all that good stuff. And it's just Family Builders Podcast on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope that this podcast has been a blessing to you and to your family, as it's been to Brother AJ and I. We've certainly had a great time together and recording them. And today we're going to do something so cool, so special, I think. We've had several guests on over the few weeks we've been doing this podcast, and the guests have been well received. They've definitely been a huge blessing to us and a help to us as we try to help people build their families. And so we thought today, being Valentine's Day, what a great idea it would be, and we'll see if it's a great idea or not. We thought what a great idea it would be to bring our Valentines on. So I am proud and happy to introduce my Valentine of 35 years, my wife, Pam. Welcome to the podcast, dear. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well.
Good. And then Brother AJ, why don't you introduce your guests?
Yes, I'm super glad to introduce my wife of 23 years, Sherry. I'm glad you're here today as well.
Good to be on.
Amen. Yeah, the ladies were a little bit timid about being on. They're used to sitting and listening to their husbands pontificate about things, but now today they get to actually be a part. And I thought it would be kind of fun to start with just sharing from each one's perspective when we met. And I know our story is a little bit weird in that we met at Bible college, and it's a little awkward, but I was dating this girl, and she said, let me introduce you to my best friend. And so we went to the college snack shop, and she said, Dave, this is my best friend, Pam. And I looked across the counter at this young woman that was working, and she said hi. And it's the only time I ever had this happen. It was like I heard God say, that's the woman you're going to marry. And he wasn't pointing at the girl I was dating. And so that made it very awkward for me. I was saying, you have to be really careful what you say here. You know, so I sort of, hi, and that was it. That was our meeting. There was no lightning bolts other than that one, but I tell you, it messed up the rest of the date that I was on at the time. As quickly as I possibly could, I extricated myself from that particular relationship, and then I went quite a long time before I asked her out, because I knew once I asked her out, that was it. It was going to be stuck. And so then when I finally did ask her out,
stuck.
Well, I mean, not stuck. Maybe stuck's the wrong word. Yeah, maybe this wasn't such a great idea having them on, Brother AJ. I don't know. I meant stuck in the most romantic way, as in I would never want to leave her.
I think you told me before that stuck meant cleave, and you were cleaving.
I was clean. Yes. Stuck is in sticking to her. Yeah, in the Greek, I think that's... Anyways.
And this is why they're pastors, because they're fast on their feet. They can come up with all this backpedaling stuff.
No, we just get in trouble with our mouths is what it is. But that's how, from my perspective, that's how we met. Do you remember, Pam, anything about that time? Did you hear a voice?
No, I did not hear a voice.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah.
Do you remember anything else about that?
I remember we talked about the score. We talked because what was interesting to me is that we both went to a Christian school.
Oh, okay.
And we both used the same curriculum, which was very rare for me. But
okay. And then, Brother AJ, why don't you share how you guys met?
Well, I'm going to let Sherry go first. I'll set it up, but we met in Bible college, but not necessarily the way you would think as soon as I say we met in Bible college. And so, Sherry, go ahead and say how we met.
So I was actually a teacher in the college. It was orientation day, I believe.
Yes.
And so all the students are there and they're coming to fill out their paperwork and pick their classes and stuff like that. So I was just going around helping the students that needed, whatever, if they needed information or whatever. So I saw AJ and I just went up to him and said, "Can I help you?" And that was our first meeting.
And it was game over. For me.
Game over or game on?
Well, game over with everything I was doing, and new game had started.
Yes.
Really, when I met her, again, she was staff faculty. I was a junior in college. I transferred in. And when I saw her, I mean, some people say there's no such thing as love at first sight, but not only was it love at first sight, I knew for sure in my pea brain that she was the one. I really felt, I say it this way, I loved basketball and the basketball went flat. Everything I loved went away, and it was like, what is going on the inside of me right now?
Yeah.
This is weird. And so here we are. That's
amazing that both of us had kind of that same, this is the one moment, the second we met our spouses. But that's, I'm sure, just the Lord taking care of us, because neither of us was all that bright, to be honest with you. So we needed to have that extra jolt, I guess. But that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today, was about finding a wife. Proverbs 18:22 says, "Whoso findeth a wife findeth a good thing." And the word "find" there is kind of the key aspect that I wanted to talk about, because there's a mentality today among young people that they have to go out searching for and almost on the hunt for, on the prowl to find their spouse, whether it's a young lady looking for a husband or a young man looking for a wife. And in churches especially, there's this idea, well, I have to go to Bible college to find my spouse. And that's not really true, because I know my wife and I, we have 5 kids. The 4 oldest are married. The youngest is getting married in April. And out of those 5, only one of them found their spouse at Bible college. It's very interesting to realize that it's actually, at least in our small perspective, relatively speaking, you are more likely to find a spouse not in Bible college than you were when you were in Bible college. So, I just want to encourage any single listeners that we have. Maybe you've been to Bible college and you're not married yet, or you are not of age yet to go to Bible college. Don't look at that as, it's not a meat market, right? You're not supposed to go to Bible college and just show up searching for a spouse. You're supposed to go to Bible college to learn the Bible, and we can talk all day, and I'm sure that'll be a future episode. But, when we're talking about finding a spouse, Brother AJ, I think you would agree that the word "find" means for us to be in a position where God can lead us to.
Yeah, I want to throw this out there, especially for our singles. If you look at Genesis chapter 1, you see that God says repeatedly, he created this and it was good. He created this and it was good. He created this and it was good, over and over. You get to chapter 2, and the word of God says in Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, "And the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an help meet for him," a help that is meet for him, a help meet for him. And so God looked at Adam and said, "Adam, I want you to work. I want you to tend the garden. I want you to name the animals. Get to work." And as Adam was doing what Adam was designed to do, He found a wife because he was doing what God had designed him to do. And so I agree with that. It's just walking and marching as a good soldier in the Lord's army as the way God would have you, and then allow God to allow your paths to cross. When I met Sherry, I had transferred Bible colleges. I mean, that's already going, okay, I'm starting over. And the very first day was September 13th that year, 1999, that I met her that day. I necessarily did not go to Bible college for a wife. I went because the Lord was leading me, and I was just marching to the orders that he had given me. So I agree, Pastor Moore.
I will say that's next level right there, remembering the day that you met her. I'm lucky I can remember the state.
Not only that date,
It's not because that stuff's not important. As a husband, that's kind of always the big presentation of like Hollywood. Oh, the husband's forgetful. Nothing's important to him. He doesn't remember her birthday. He doesn't remember the anniversary. I've never forgotten your birthday. I've never forgotten our anniversary. I've never forgotten Valentine's Day, which it is today. I've never forgotten, any of those things because you're important to me. And the Hollywood presentation of a marriage is definitely not the biblical presentation of a marriage.
Absolutely.
And JJ, you mentioned about everything else went away because you had found her. That's our wives are supposed to be that important to us.
I agree. I know I said that, and yet the application of that was a lot harder. After we got married, I called her dad. We met in September 13th. I called her dad October 31st. We got engaged March 14th and married July 4th, all in that less than a year. But the reason I say all that is to say I knew she was a gift from the Lord. I knew she was the one, but the maturity didn't kick in for 5-6 years. I say that all the time. We've been married 23 years, and they've been 16 of the greatest years of our lives, And that's mostly me. Sherry, let me ask you a question. Just with that in mind, the early years of marriage, how did that pan out? How did that work? That immature husband?
Well, we were both immature. I think we didn't realize how much time it really takes to build a relationship. And so I was desirous of the time, and I think that maybe you had just felt like life was the same. I just now have a wife. I think we just didn't spend enough time together because there were things outside, especially being in the military, there were things outside of the house that were drawing our attentions away from each other.
Yeah, it's amazing. My other podcast is on time tomorrow. And I'll just plug this in here. There's 3 things you can do with time. You can waste it, spend it, or invest it. And the problem is, I thought I was actually doing, having good stewardship of my time, not realizing, as we've said a lot, Pastor Moore, love is spelled time. We're going to throw it back at you guys, but with that aspect of time, how did you guys juggle that?
Yeah, it's, and of course, being in the ministry is very difficult. And that was something that was an issue for us right from while we were dating.
Yeah.
Because one of the first things my wife said to me was, I'm not going to marry a pastor. And at the time, I wasn't surrendered to the ministry. And so I was like, yeah, no problem. I'm not planning to be a pastor. And I asked her, but I said, why don't you want to marry a pastor? She said she had seen in pastors in her life where they had just basically left their family to fend for themselves. They put all their time and energy into the ministry and didn't ever spend time with their families.
Yeah.
I think, Pam, you mentioned specifically about a pastor leaving home at like 7 in the morning, coming home at 11 at night.
And not seeing his children.
Yeah.
His wife had to handle everything. And it's just like, no, we have children together, not separate. And I didn't want that.
And it is a constant balancing act, and it's something that we're 35 years later, we'll let you know if we ever perfect it. But it's not like you can just say, oh, I'm sorry your loved one died, but I have this on my calendar that this is 45 minutes I have to spend with my wife. She's understanding that emergencies happen, things come up, but at the same time, it's got to genuinely be an emergency. And we have found, sometimes we spend time doing things that you wouldn't normally think of as a date, but it's a chance for us to spend time together. I like to drive. I don't mind driving. She hates to ride in the car. And so sometimes we'll do, I'll be running some errands and I'll say, well, you want to go with me? And she'll be like, no, not really. And I'll say, okay, but you're working later and I'm working later. And this is, until next Thursday, this is the last 45 minutes we have to spend together. Now, do you want to come with me? Okay, yeah. So, so we have that time balancing thing, especially in the ministry, is really important to keep that as a priority.
Absolutely.
True. I'd like to ask Mrs. Moore a question, and then Pastor Moore, you ask Sherry a question. But I want to base it on this scripture. This is one of our family verses, Psalm 127:1, which is very fitting for family builders. Except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. And the last part says, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain. When we got married, I put AJ plus Sherry and our anniversary date in my Bible. And then we had Chanel, so I put Chanel's name. Then we had Symphony. And this is a short podcast, so I can't name all of our kids. But how important, looking back, now that you guys are empty nesters, how important would you say isn't just mom and child time, but mom and dad and child time?
It's very important. There were times when we would just decide, oh, we're going to take a 3-day and we're just going to go do this. And it was just that. We didn't have anything special to go. We were just going to go and spend family time.
Like when we went to see the Corn Palace in South Dakota.
Yes. It was just something like that we didn't, it was just that, spending time together.
If you're not familiar with the Corn Palace in South Dakota, let me just tell you, this should be one of the 7 wonders of the world. It's this little tiny town in South Dakota, and they have a civic center that they call the Corn Palace. And on the outside of this big building, they do these incredible murals made entirely of corn. So corn stalks, corn kernels, corn seeds, the tassels, every part of the corn plant. And they make these beautiful, intricate designs and pictures telling stories around the building with the pictures. And they redo it every year in a different thing.
Yeah.
So they've got pictures of all the different, and there's nothing, I mean, it's just you drive up, you park, and you walk around, and you're like, wow, that's a lot of corn, and it's you see it and you're convinced of 2 things. Number 1, there are multiple uses of corn, and number 2, these people might not have a full cable TV package available in their house, because it is just so, it's like they've got a lot of time on their hands in South Dakota. But yeah, we lived in Minnesota at the time. We had I think our 3 youngest kids. Yep. And when it was a Wednesday night after church, we loaded them into the back seat of the Chevy Celebrity, and we took off driving for the border, and we got into, I think, Watertown, South Dakota, and we spent the night in a Super 8, and the next day we drove and went to see the Little House on the Prairie site at DeSmet, South Dakota, and then we drove down to the Corn Palace, and then we drove home.
Yep.
And the kids, they loved it. They enjoyed it. It was just like time with dad and mom, and it was really special. Okay, so I got a question for you, Sherry. AJ has talked about, when he was younger and his focus on, when he's in the military specifically, his focus on like getting the next promotion and so forth. There's, and this is maybe going to put you on the spot a little bit, and I don't mean to, but there has to be a balance between time. I could spend all my time with my wife and never go to work, and then we don't have any money to pay bills. How did you, Sherry, balance the need for income, and with more and more kids every few months for you guys, the need for more and more income with the need for dad/husband to be around?
So when we were in the military, it wasn't really a huge deal because we had insurance was free, basically. It's included. So when we left the military, we had 6. We just had our twins. So after that, finances became really tight after we got out of the military, especially trying to have insurance. I mean, I think our insurance was over $1,000 a month. And that was just, the 8 of us. So
Just the 8 of us.
Yes.
Apparently you never saw the 8 is enough thing, right?
yeah, so I started, I think probably the first thing I did was I started redoing skirts. Like I would take a pair of jeans and make it into a skirt. I called that denim do-over. So I tried to do some things in the house that I didn't have to go outside of the house and bring in some income. So I've had a few different in-home businesses that have brought in a little bit of income.
Have you ever found that you had a hard time with, he has to go do something for church, he has to go counsel a church member, or he has to go make a visit, but it was time you wanted? Have you ever struggled with sharing him with the Lord, as it were?
I don't think I've ever struggled sharing him with the Lord per se. Sharing him at times when I felt like, okay, this is not really needful, or it's not necessary, it's not for the church or something like that. Those would be the times, or times where I felt like, okay, I could do that with you. I could help you with that, and I'm not per se invited. Um, so
That was a hint, AJ. I don't know if you caught
Noted.
it. Yeah.
but yeah, I don't feel like I've ever we do a lot of, well, I wouldn't say we do a lot of counseling together, but we have done a lot of counseling together. But I don't think that I've ever really been jealous of church time. I have been jealous of time that I felt he was doing things that weren't necessary,
Yeah.
or at times where I felt like I asked you to do this, but you're doing what you want to do instead. I mean, it's just, but I do the same.
Has it been 6 months yet? We'll get to it.
But I can also say I've wasted a lot of time through the years. I mean, again, 23 years, I've got a lot of examples of sowing seeds in places that aren't going to produce anything that's really going to build our family. And so learning and adjusting, my goodness, is super key to lasting long and never letting up. So
Yeah, my two oldest boys, they're 30 and 27. But back, let's see, they would have been like 10 and 7, I guess, at the time. But I was pastoring, and my wife had taken them to a secondhand store, like a Goodwill type store, and they had found a Hot Wheels racetrack, and it was like a quarter or something. So they bought it, and they brought it home. They're like, Dad, we got this racetrack. We put it together. And just as they were getting home, I had gotten a call from a church member that their adult son was involved in some sin, and they needed me to go visit him. And he was a member of the church, so I went to visit this. I had to go visit this young man. I said, "Listen, boys, I promise, when I get home, we'll put together the racetrack." This is like 7:30 at night, So I go visit this guy, and it ends up being this long, drawn out thing. I didn't get home until well after midnight. It was like 1 or 2 in the morning, just from the counseling with this young man. And the whole time I'm talking to him, I was really struggling because I was kind of angry, because I was like, you're doing something is wrong. You're just being a knucklehead. And my boys are at home thinking, where's Dad? And I mean, it tore me apart. And I finally just said to him, I said, I want to just bust you one right in the noggin, because you're keeping me from my family, and for no good reason. You know what's right. And he kind of broke down then, and he apologized, and he did make things right. So I wish I would have thought to say that a couple hours earlier. But I get home, and of course the house is dark, and I go inside real quiet, and I shut the door and lock it, and I go in the bedroom. Pam's asleep, and I woke her up. I said, "Honey, I'm home." And she said the boys were really sad. They had to go to bed. And I said, "Yeah, I know." And I said, "Listen, I'm gonna go wake them up." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because they need to know I keep my promises." Mm-hmm. And she's like, "Whatever." And she went back to sleep. So I went up to their room, and I woke them up. And they're both out. It sounded like a lumberjack convention in there. They're sawing logs. And I woke them up. I said, "Boys, wake up, Dad's home." And they're both, "What's wrong, Dad? What's wrong?" I said, "Nothing's wrong, but I promised you when I got home, we put your racetrack together." So the older one, he was all excited. He jumps out of bed and turn the lights on. He starts getting out the racetrack. The younger one, he just kind of slides off the edge of the bed, sitting on the floor with his blanket wrapped around him watching, but we got it put together. We ran it through about 5 or 6 times, had fun, about a half hour. I said, okay, boys. And I said, I want you to know Dad keeps his promises. So I'm sorry I wasn't here earlier. I'm sorry I couldn't do it when we wanted to, but at least when I got home, we put together the racetrack.
Mm-hmm.
And the younger one said, "That's great, Dad. Can I go back to bed now?" I said, "Yeah." So they went back to bed, but they both remember that.
Yeah.
They talk about it on occasion. Hey, Dad, remember that time you woke us up in the middle of the night to put the Hot Wheels track together? And I always respond with, "Yes." And what did you learn? Dad keeps his promises.
Yeah.
You have to make that kind of thing a priority. If you don't, you're gonna be one of those guys whose kids grow up and don't want anything to do with them because, frankly, you liked them.
Yeah, I feel like most of my mistakes, heavy mistakes and regrets, were, thank God, done when they were so little. That now you ask them, just define your dad, they'll say something that even I'm unfamiliar with because
Right.
I've got so much baggage that they just don't see, or they've allowed me to mature as their dad. I want to say this too, being transparent with your wife, with your kids, apologizing. A lot of
Yeah.
husbands don't. It's not easy. I feel like in the early years, we never argue, but we just go silent. And it's because of a lack of apologizing or dealing with things. So now, if we apologize and deal with things, it's like, I want to be mad at her, but it's kind of over. She apologized, and we move forward. And it's so much better than letting the sun go down on your wrath or not addressing things. Not that we're perfect at all of this, especially me. I even just sitting here, I'm going, man, 23 years of mistakes. Happy Valentine's Day, but I promise the next 23 will be great.
But yeah, that reminds me when I was in Bible college, we had a counseling class, and the professor said the 7 hardest words in the English language. I was wrong. Will you forgive me? And there was a married student. He raised his hand. He said, "There's an 8th word. Goes first. Honey, I was wrong. Will you forgive me?" and the teacher goes, "Oh yeah, that's yeah, definitely." And all the single students are like, "Oh, and now being married, we know, yeah, it is hard. It's hard to say I was wrong." And my wife is German and Dutch, and I'm Scotch Irish. And so, you want to talk stubborn, we could have the Olympics of stubborn, with us. Although I am part French, so I do give in kind of easily most of the time. But the idea of admitting that you're wrong, it's just so hard sometimes. But it's important. It's important to be that transparent, especially with your kids. You have to be the authority to your kids, but you also have to be able to say, "I'm not perfect."
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like every time, but
I'd like to ask all of us this question. I know we're probably pushing up on our time, but if you can give a message either to your children, grandchildren, or just our listeners on not getting divorced. Marriage at time. Well, my mom says it this way: marriage isn't for wimps. Raising children isn't for wimps.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough at times. And it's Valentine's Day. And I noticed a couple years back, I wrote something saying that Valentine's Day is hard for many people. Some of it is because they've lost their spouse since last Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
But some of it is they did not lose their spouse by death. They lost their spouse by divorce.
Yeah.
And if you can give a message, Pastor Moore, we'll start with you if you could, and then I'll go. And then ladies, if you'd like to jump in there, but just what message can we give to those who aren't married yet or are married and just considering breaking it off? Obviously, the Bible has some mandates there, but in addition to that, Pastor Moore, what do you say?
And I would tell them the same thing I say to people when I do pre-marriage counseling. The only way that a marriage lasts until death is if you try every day.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot. There's no days that you can just phone it in and not try to love your spouse. When you're dating, you love everything about them, even their flaws make you laugh and chuckle. But when you've been married a couple years, there, I saw this little thing on social media the other day. It says marriage is looking at your spouse and wondering why you never noticed how loudly they breathe. And how irritating it is. I mean, when you live with a person 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's a lot different than when you're dating, right?
Yeah.
I mean, from the man's perspective, when you're dating, she never lets you see her without makeup on, without her hair done, without her, her clothing being matched and perfect and stuff. And from the man's perspective, he at least brushes his teeth and combs his hair, which is really about all we can do. Well, not you, brother AJ. You brush your teeth and polish up on top, I guess. But but for those of you who don't know, brother AJ is well, he's preparing for heaven. In heaven, there'll be no more partying over there. But he's bald as a goose egg. But anyways, we put on our best, right, when we're dating, and even when we're engaged. But when you're married and you're living together, at some point they're going to see your worst, and so you have to try every day.
Yeah.
When you stand up on the platform and you're in your wedding gown and he's in his tuxedo and you say, I'll love you, I'll honor you, I'll cherish you. You're not envisioning doing that when he's complaining and about to die because he has a cold. Or he's not envisioning doing that when she's being emotional and irrational and well, I really can't relate to that because my wife's never been those things. But I've heard that there's some women who act like their mothers, and you have to try every day.
Yeah.
And the day you stop trying is the day you fail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I know I asked the question, but multiple answers, but one that I would say is key is having no plan B. When I said I do, for better or for worse, the vows, I said them as a 21-year-old immature, ignorant man that was genuinely in love. And so I believe what has kept us together is the core value of individually loving Jesus, because there were times in 23 years that loving each other was tough, whether it was her fault, my fault, regardless. But in our core, divorce just wasn't an option. It wasn't on the table. And since Sherry loved the Lord privately and I loved the Lord privately, when we were together, we weren't really in love. We were not happy with each other. But the reality is, marriage isn't a feeling. It's a fact. It's a covenant. It's a promise. And you said you keep your promise. You taught your sons that lesson. Well, this is a promise way before we had Chanel, etc. And so realizing too, I got to bathe in her forgiveness. That's pretty awesome to experience genuine forgiveness, whether it's verbal, I forgive you, or just I'm not going to bring it up or whatever it is. I'm thankful for that. And so I would encourage you guys, if you're single, don't have a plan B, no prenups, just get married. If this is what Lord wants. But then reality kicks in too. When it gets hard, you don't leave. I mean, God never leaves us nor forsakes us in the worst state that we're in.
And it will get hard someday.
Yeah.
There are days, no matter what your fairy tale story is, do not listen to those liars who say, oh, we've been married 50 years and never had an argument. That is not physically possible.
I always say too, these cartoons, these movies, they always end with they lived happily ever after, the wedding. They don't show you a week later.
Right.
They don't show
yelling
you.
at him because he left his slacks on the floor.
Say that again.
When she's yelling at him because he left his clothes on the floor, or he's sitting there thinking, why can she really not cook? What is the deal here? And I mean, yeah.
So that's my 2 cents. Just don't
have you, Sherry. Do you have anything you would tell your kids to help them avoid failing at marriage?
What you guys actually were just alluding to, I was thinking about, Hollywood makes marriage look so wonderful, and we think we're going to live happily ever after we say I do, but it's not the case. It's a battle. It's something you have to do every day. It's not just going to magically happen. It's work, and it's hard. And living with living with somebody new that you've never lived with before is I mean, because you grew up with your siblings or you grew up with your mom and dad or whoever you grew up with, you're used to them. It's been your whole life.
Yeah.
So adding something new is always a challenge, and it's always work. And so it's not the fairy tale ending, but it can be a fairy tale life. I mean, you can have the life, but you just have to work at it, and it's just not the what Hollywood portrays is not reality. And
Right.
And even really what a lot of Christians portray,
Yeah.
social media,
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
our life is perfect. Yeah. How many times did you have to shoot that picture and yell at your husband because you did it wrong? Right. What about you, Pam? What would you say to our kids?
It is just being steadfast. You made that covenant with your husband, and you need to stay steadfast, unmovable. That's where we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be right there with them and always be there with them. And it's a day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour, something you continually must work at.
What she said there, I don't even know if she noticed it, but she nailed it. She found the key. With your husband.
Yeah.
Not behind him, not in front of him, with him. And that's where the hard part is. It's easy. You get going and he swerves or slows down, and all of a sudden you're in front of him. You better come back alongside him. Or vice versa, your husband, from the husband's perspective, she lags back because of being the weaker vessel. You're supposed to be with her, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her.
First Peter 3:7 says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. And I often make a joke. I'm supposed to dwell with her. And a couple birthdays or Christmases ago, I got her a homemade ice cream machine. And I was like, this is the greatest gift ever. It'll produce some family time and all this stuff. A couple days later, my oldest son, AC, says, Dad, mom doesn't like homemade ice cream. Winning, not. So dwell with them, please. Spend time
really
with
don't
them.
like homemade ice cream? How could that be possible?
No, I just don't. I never have.
Oh my goodness, there's nothing better.
So my husband and I were walking through the airport, and this was the first time in a long time we'd gone somewhere together. And normally I'll walk behind him because he walks slower than I do.
Because she's used to walking with 5 kids going to the grocery store.
And I would walk super, super fast. Wanted to get the task done and whatnot. But anyway, I was walking next to him, but I discovered he's not used to walking with me because he started running me into trash cans and into chairs and things like that, just simply because he wasn't used to me being beside him. I was always behind him. And it was just one of those things. It's something that you have to continually to work at. It's making those simple adjustments. Yeah. And even like with his hearing, I have discovered I have to talk louder and I have to be in the same room with him. I can't talk to him from the kitchen. It's just little things like that you have to continually make adjustments.
Yeah. That's a good analogy there. When you're walking alongside as husband and wife, don't push each other into the garbage can of life. Make sure you're leaving room for each other to go around those garbage cans so that you're not running into them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. They make a lot of noise in an airport. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and we probably should wrap it up for today. I hope it's been a benefit to our listeners. And frankly, if it hasn't, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So I hope you guys have had a good time. AJ and Sherry, thank you, Pam and Sherry, for joining with us today and for carving out time from your busy schedules to help out in families being built around the country. And hopefully it's been a blessing to each of our listeners. So on that note, happy Valentine's Day to all of you. Happy Valentine's Day to our listeners, although you'll hear this 3 days after Valentine's Day. But while we're closing here, Brother AJ, why don't you go ahead and take us out?
Sure. Thank you for listening to the Family Builders Podcast. Please subscribe and share this week's podcast with your friends and family. Also, if you have any questions for either of us, please do not hesitate to email us at familybuilderspodcast@gmail.com. Who knows? Maybe we'll even answer your question on one of our future episodes. Until next time, family builders, never let up.